Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this presentation. My name is Persefoni and I'm a PhD student from the University of Sheffield in the UK. And today I will talk about the last study of my PhD, which is looking at the relationship between empathy, social bonding and synchronization in children's musical interactions. I will start with talking about my PhD in general to give you some background information, and then I will focus specifically on this study. So looking at the research about interpersonal synchronization and social bonding in general, research has shown that when people come together and they synchronize their movements with one another, that can have a positive effect on their social behavior. For example, synchronization can lead to higher cooperation, perceived similarity. It can make people feel like they understand each other's thoughts and feelings better after they have aligned their movements. And also studies have shown that social behavior, relationships and personality traits can have a positive effect on the attainment of interpersonal synchronization. For example, a study has found that people with higher empathy are better at synchronizing their movements with one another. So after reviewing this research, I had some questions about musical and social behavior in general. So I was wondering, are they linked in a bidirectional manner? And do they affect one another simultaneously? And if that's the case, how can we investigate this empirically? And what are the possible implications? In order to answer some of these questions, I decided to focus specifically on empathy and look at the relationship between empathy and interpersonal synchronization in musical contexts. I reviewed the existing research and I developed a framework that supports a positive feedback loop between empathy and synchronization. That means that during musical group interactions, people utilize their empathy skills to attain synchronization with one another, and this attained synchronization can support their state empathy, the empathy they experience during that interaction. And then this enhanced empathy can in turn support their in-between synchronization. And this loop continues happening as long as people continue interacting with one another, and of course as long as the environment supports this loop, this relationship. So this is the loop, this is the framework, and lots of parts of it require further investigation because this remains a theoretical framework. And the present study is focusing on this particular part of the loop, which is looking at the relationship between synchronization and situational empathy in children's musical interactions. So more specifically, I wanted to see whether synchronization can lead to social bonding after short-term musical interactions, so when children interact with one another for a few minutes. And then I wanted to see whether trait empathy and or induced empathy can have an effect on these social bonding effects, whether empathy moderates these effects. And when I say induced empathy, I mean the situational empathy between two people, or two children in this case, that has been experimentally manipulated. So some of the children were put in a situation where they were asked to explicitly imagine the emotions of the other child they would interact with. What we know so far is that long-term musical interactions that involve synchronization can lead to higher trait empathy between children and also can lead to higher closeness and perceived similarity. And another effect that has been found in two studies with adults has shown that trait empathy can moderate the social bonding effects of synchronization, with people with higher empathy experiencing stronger social bonding. And this can be found in both interactions that involve people just observing an interaction, but also when they participate actively in it. What we don't know yet is whether synchronization can have an effect on social bonding after a short-term musical interaction, and we don't know whether trait empathy or induced empathy can moderate the social bonding effects of synchronization in children. We know that that's the case with adults, but we don't know what's happening when children interact and play music together. So in order to answer these questions, I designed a study and collected data from 5 primary schools in Greece. And I conducted the study in Greece because that's my home country, and I also have a background in education, so that gave me access to a larger pool of participants. And in the end, I collected data from 130 children whose age was around 10 years old, and they formed 65 pairs. Children completed 2 tasks in total, but for this study and for this presentation, I'm going to talk about one of the tasks. The process was that children first filled out a trait empathy questionnaire, measuring their trait empathy. Then they filled out a questionnaire measuring the social bonding before the task. They completed the task and answered the social bonding questionnaire once again to see whether there were any differences between the pre-assessment and the post-assessment questionnaire. In order to assess trait empathy, I used a relatively new questionnaire called CASES, which measures cognitive, affective, and somatic empathy aspects in children. And you can see an example here, an example of each aspect. And I translated the questionnaire into Greek and validated with some children from a Greek school in Sheffield and some bilingual adults before using it for the study. Social bonding was measured in terms of closeness, perceived similarity, and state empathy. Closeness was measured using the iOS scale, the inclusion of other in the self, and children were asked to choose the set of circles that best represented how close they felt to the other child. And then similarity and state empathy were measured using some questions from relevant studies, and I have 2 examples there. Do you think the other child likes the same music as you is a similarity question, and can you understand how the other child is feeling at the moment is an example of the state empathy questions. As for the task, 2 children at a time came into the room, and I asked them to listen to some music through headphones and play on the beat of the music using small percussion instruments while looking at each other. What the children didn't know was that there were 2 synchrony conditions. The synchronous condition, where children were listening to the same music at the same tempo, and the asynchronous condition, where children were listening to the same music at different tempi. And also there were 2 empathy manipulation conditions. One was the empathy manipulation one, where children listened to a fake story about the other child before starting playing music, where the other half of the children didn't listen to anything, they just proceeded to the task as it was. And this is the little story of the empathy manipulation condition, which was about the other child having lost their favorite toy before coming to school that morning. So the story asked the children, can you imagine how the other child might be feeling at the moment, or how would you feel if you lost your favorite toy? I analyzed the data using linear mixed effects models, accounting for variance across schools, participants, and the pairs they formed. And I put all the social bonding outcomes together into one variable. So I produced one model for this data. And before doing that, I excluded all participants who said that they knew each other from before or were friends. And this is the final model, which included an interaction between synchrony and empathy manipulation, as well as a main effect of time, which it refers to the pre and post measurement of social bonding, as well as trait empathy. And these are the final results, which show that time and trait empathy had a significant main effect, which means that all social bonding scores after the task were higher than the ones before, regardless of the condition. And also children with higher empathy tended to give a higher social bonding rate, again, regardless of the conditions. And there was also a synchrony and empathy manipulation interaction involved in the model, but that was not statistically significant. Looking now at some graphs that represent these results, we can see here that post-task measurements of social bonding were much higher than before the musical task. So that means that all children experienced higher social bonding after all musical interactions, regardless of how synchronized they were. Here again, we can see the significant effect of trait empathy, with children with higher empathy giving higher social bonding scores, again, regardless of the synchrony or empathy manipulation conditions. And this is a graph of the interaction between synchrony and empathy manipulation. And we can see from the two bars at the bottom of the screen that induced empathy increased the social bonding effects of synchronization, but it actually had the opposite effects in the asynchronous condition. It actually had a negative impact on social bonding. Of course, these results are not statistically significant and should be approached with caution, of course. So the main effect of time means that the musical interaction was experienced as a shared activity that bonding children with one another regardless of the level of synchrony achieved. And that was the case with trained empathy as well, where perhaps music enhanced the social aspect of that experience, of that interaction, allowing children with higher trained empathy to better understand their peers' thoughts and feelings and bond with them more than the children with lower trait empathy. Of course, these effects mean that perhaps synchrony or the synchrony manipulation of this study was not strong enough to exhibit different effects on social bonding. And the fact that the synchrony and induced empathy interaction was not significant might be because the empathy manipulation was not strong enough, or the musical interaction was too short and it didn't affect the social bonding between the children. And another reason might be that children didn't fully understand the questions, so future research should use perhaps different questions or different measurements to assess the bonding between the children. So what I'm planning to do next is to refine the random effect structure and include a random intercept and slope for synchrony and empathy manipulation that will vary across participants' pairs and schools. I will run separate models for each social bonding outcome to see whether there are different effects, and I will look into the effects of the different separate aspects of trait empathy. As I said earlier, cases, questionnaire measures, cognitive, affective, and somatic aspects of empathy, so it will be very interesting to see whether these aspects have a different effect. And I would like to close this presentation by saying that this is the first study looking at individual differences in the experience of social bonding of synchronization in children that has the potential to inform musical interventions that utilize synchronization to promote prosocial behavior and social bonding. And it can also inform the positive feedback loop framework that I told you about earlier, which also has the potential to promote children's simultaneous social and musical development and also increase similarity, closeness and empathy across intergroup members. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.